The night began with whispers that moved like soft smoke through the crowd. People had gathered in the grand hall for a party that everyone in the city had been waiting for. The chandeliers glowed with golden light, music played in the background, and cameras clicked as famous faces entered one after another. But the air carried a sense of waiting, as if something bigger was about to happen, something that would leave everyone speechless. It started when the doors slowly opened, and the sound in the room dropped for just a moment. People turned their heads, curious, expecting another actor or another leader to step in. But then they saw him. Keanu Reeves walked through the door, calm as always, with that quiet smile that spoke of kindness more than fame. His presence alone would have made the room pause, but it was the figure beside him that made hearts skip. Sandra Bullock walked next to him, her hand gently resting on his arm, her eyes shining with both confidence and warmth. For a second, the crowd forgot to breathe. Keanu and Sandra had been admired for years, both stars in their own light. But seeing them step together, as if they had come not just as friends but as a couple, shook everyone to silence. The whispers began to rise. Some people smiled, delighted at the sight. Others frowned, confused, unsure what to think. A wave of mixed feelings rolled through the hall, and that is when the tension truly began. Many remembered their history, the way they had shared screens. Years ago, the way audiences had always felt a special bond between them. Some even believed they were soulmates who had never found the right time. Now, standing side by side, they looked like two pieces that finally belonged together. Keanu looked around the room, and instead of enjoying the sudden attention, he gave a small bow, a gesture of humility that made people soften. Sandra, on the other hand, gave a smile that carried both grace and strength, a smile that told everyone she had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. The two of them walked further into the hall, moving with calm steps, but each step felt like a wave spreading across the party. Phones came out, flashes tried to capture them, but Keanu and Sandra did not hurry or hide. They were not here to shock or to show off. They were simply there, together. But the story of that night was not just about the entrance. It was about what came after. As they moved deeper into the room, a few voices grew louder, whispers turning into sharp words. Some people could not accept the sight. Jealousy stirred in the corners, pride twisted in others. A well-known producer muttered to his friend that this was just a show, a stunt to steal attention. Another guest laughed too loudly, making a comment that reached Sandra's ears. Her smile did not fade, but her eyes carried a shadow for a brief second. Keanu noticed it. He leaned closer and whispered something only she could hear, and whatever he said brought the warmth back to her face. She held his arm a little tighter, and together they kept walking. Suspense grew. Would the night turn bitter? Would envy or judgment break the calm they had brought? The cameras could not stop following them, and the audience inside the hall could not look away. People began to remember the times they had seen Keanu sit with strangers on the street or heard stories of Sandra helping quietly in moments of need. Their past acts of kindness returned to the surface, and it made some of the cold hearts soften again. Still, the conflict remained, because kindness often faces the test of pride. As the first speeches of the evening began, Keanu and Sandra chose a place not in the front, but somewhere in the middle of the hall, among others, as if they wanted to remind everyone that fame does not make someone higher than others. This simple act created a stir. One guest leaned over to another and whispered, "They could sit anywhere, but they chose here with us." The whisper spread, and soon many eyes began to see them not as stars above, but as people beside them. Then came the first twist of the night. The host, noticing the wave of energy around their presence, invited them to the stage, expecting them to take the spotlight. But instead of stepping forward with pride, Keanu shook his head gently. He smiled and lifted his hand toward another guest, an old actor who had been forgotten by most of the industry. Keanu's gesture was clear. Let him speak. The host was surprised, the audience was stunned, and the old actor himself looked as if he could not believe what was happening. Tears touched his eyes as he walked up, trembling but smiling. And while the world watched the old man gather courage, Keanu and Sandra clapped louder than anyone in the hall. This was the beginning of a night that no one would forget. It was no longer just about the shock of seeing them arrive as a couple. It was about humility in the face of attention, kindness in the middle of jealousy, and the resilience of two people who refused to let the world define them. But the night was not finished. Behind the applause, behind the shining lights, there were still shadows waiting to rise, and secrets waiting to test both of them. And so the first chapter of this story closes with a question that kept everyone hooked. What would happen next, when love, kindness, and humility would be tested by forces that even stars could not control? The applause for the old actor slowly faded, but the memory of Keanu and Sandra's quiet gesture lingered in the air, like a soft perfume. Many in the hall began to see them in a new light, but others still whispered with envy. The night was far from calm. If anything, the small waves of conflict were just beginning to rise into a storm. As the old actor finished his speech, his voice trembling yet powerful, he turned toward Keanu and Sandra. With teary eyes, he said, "People may forget names on posters, but they never forget kindness. Thank you for reminding me of my worth tonight." Those words did not just touch the hearts of the guests. They cut deep into the silence of the hall. Some clapped, some bowed their heads, and some turned their faces away, unwilling to accept the truth in those lines. While many celebrated the humility of the moment, another story was building quietly in the background. A director once close, to Sandra but now distant, stood by the bar with narrowed eyes. He leaned closer to a producer and muttered, "This is all for attention. They know exactly how to play the crowd. Kindness sells better than scandal these days." The producer gave a cold laugh, and their words spread like poison, reaching ears that were ready to believe the worst. Keanu, however, seemed untouched by the undercurrent of doubt. He leaned forward in his seat, speaking softly to a young assistant, sitting nearby. "You look nervous," he said gently. The young man froze, surprised that Keanu noticed. "It's my first event," the assistant admitted, almost whispering. "I feel invisible." Keanu gave a small smile. "Sometimes, being invisible means you can see more clearly than anyone else. That is your strength tonight." Sandra watched this exchange, her heart warming. She placed her hand over Keanu's, and in that small gesture, the strength of their bond glowed brighter than the chandeliers above them. But while kindness moved quietly through their actions, the suspense of the night grew louder. The host announced a dance to open the evening, and all eyes turned once more toward Keanu and Sandra. Would they step forward together? Would they show the world what many already suspected? That this was not just friendship, but something deeper, more fragile, more real? The music began, soft strings filling the air, and after a moment of hesitation, Sandra rose. She looked at Keanu with a questioning smile, and for the first time that night, he seemed unsure. He had always been calm, always grounded, but in that moment, he hesitated. The audience leaned forward, sensing the weight of his choice. Finally, with a quiet nod, he stood. Together, they walked to the center of the hall. The dance began, and the room fell into a hush. They moved slowly at first, careful, almost cautious, as though each step was a story, each glance an unfinished sentence. The world around them blurred, the crowd, the cameras, the whispers, all faded into the background. For those watching, it was not just a dance, it was a conversation without words, a reminder of something that had always been there between them, waiting for the right moment to be seen. But as their movements grew more graceful, a shadow cut through the beauty. From the corner of the room, a voice rang out, sharp and mocking. "So this is it? Is this a romance or just another performance?" The words sliced through the silence like glass breaking. The music stuttered, the crowd gasped, and Sandra froze mid-step. Her smile faded, her eyes clouded with pain. Keanu's jaw tightened, but instead of anger, his face showed patience. He guided Sandra off the dance floor gently, whispering, "Don't let their bitterness write our story." His words steadied her, but the tension in the hall deepened. The crowd split into two halves, those who admired them more for their calmness, and those who clung to doubt, eager for flaws to be revealed. To shift the mood, the host called for another performance. This time, a young musician, a girl barely in her 20s, stepped onto the stage with shaking hands. Her guitar looked heavy in her grip, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. Whispers started again, cruel ones. "She's too young. She'll embarrass herself. Why did they even invite her?" Before the girl could begin, Sandra rose again. She walked straight to the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step louder than the whispers. She reached the girl and whispered something that only the two of them could hear. The girl's hands stopped trembling, her shoulders lifted. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, shaky, but Sandra stood beside her like a silent guardian, and slowly the music grew. It filled the room with a raw, unpolished beauty that silenced even the sharpest critics. Keanu watched from his seat, pride in his eyes. He knew Sandra's courage was not in grand speeches, but in lifting others, even when the world doubted them. The crowd applauded when the song ended, louder than before, their hearts softened once again. But beneath the applause, the director, by the bar, clenched his glass tighter. His eyes burned with envy, and in his mind, the night was far from over. He was waiting for his moment, waiting to drag shadows over the light that Keanu and Sandra carried. As the evening moved forward, the couple returned to their seats. But inside their hearts, they both felt it. The night was testing them. Not just as individuals, not just as actors, but as two people who carried kindness in a world that often mistook it for weakness. The second chapter closed not with answers, but with questions. Would envy win over respect? Would whispers of doubt drown out the truth? And most importantly, could Keanu and Sandra remain unshaken as more shadows prepared to rise? The hall was alive with applause after the young musician's song. But beneath that applause, tension grew heavier like storm clouds hiding behind the brightness of day. On the surface, everything seemed calm again. Smiles returned, glasses clinked, laughter flowed, but the undercurrent of envy and judgment had not disappeared. It was waiting, watching, ready to strike at the most fragile moment. Keanu sat quietly, his hand resting near Sandra's, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was not a man who chased attention, yet he could feel every gaze on them, both warm and cold. Sandra leaned closer, her voice low, almost trembling. "It feels like every step we take tonight is being weighed, like someone wants us to fail." Keanu turned his head toward her, his expression steady. "That is because kindness unsettles those who cannot find it in themselves," he whispered. She breathed out slowly, and for a moment, his calm became hers. But their brief peace was shattered when the director at the bar, the same man whose envy had burned all night, finally found his moment. He raised his glass high, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "A toast," he declared. The hall quieted, unsure whether to follow his lead. He stepped forward, his smile sharp, his words heavy with hidden venom. "To those who know how to act not only on screen but also on stage, and even in their personal lives. After all, some people never stop performing." The words landed like stones thrown into still water. The meaning was clear. It was not a toast. It was an attack. Whispers broke out again, louder this time, feeding the fire. Sandra's face paled, her hand tightening into a fist under the table. Keanu did not flinch. He slowly stood, his calmness a stark contrast to the director's mocking energy. He did not raise his voice. He did not match insult with insult. Instead, he looked directly at the man and said softly, "Real performance is not about pretending. It is about choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier." The room fell silent. Keanu's words did not sting like an argument. They disarmed like truth. Sandra stood beside him, her presence strong, her silence as powerful as his words. Some guests lowered their heads, ashamed of their own whispers. Others clapped softly, unsure but moved. But the director was not finished. His pride had been pierced, and he could not let go. He stepped closer, his voice rising. Kindness, humility, easy words for someone who already has everything, fame, money, attention. You stand above the rest and then pretend to be humble. Do you think we cannot see through it? The air in the hall grew heavy. For the first time that night, Sandra felt anger rising in her chest. She wanted to speak, to fight back, but Keanu placed a gentle hand on her arm, asking her silently to wait. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Humility is not pretending to be small. It is remembering that no one is too small to matter." The words spread through the hall like a ripple, reaching every corner, every heart. Some eyes welled with tears. Others turned away, unwilling to face the truth. Sandra's eyes softened, her anger dissolving into pride. Yet the night was far from finished. Just as the crowd began to absorb Keanu's words, another twist appeared. From the back of the hall, an unexpected figure arrived. A woman in her 60s, dressed with quiet dignity, her face familiar to some, though not all. Whispers rose again as people realized who she was, an old teacher who had once taught both Keanu and Sandra in their early days of acting. She walked forward slowly, her steps steady, her eyes filled with memories. "I taught them," she said, her voice clear though soft. "I saw them when they had nothing. I watched them struggle, fail, and rise again. And if there is one truth I can tell you, it is this. What they carry tonight is not a performance. It is who they are." The hall erupted in murmurs. Her presence changed everything. This was not a celebrity defending another celebrity. This was someone ordinary, someone with no reason to lie, speaking from a place of truth. Sandra's eyes filled with tears as she walked toward the woman, embracing her tightly. Keanu bowed his head in respect, his humility shining even brighter. For a brief moment, the hall was united again, touched by something real. But even as the teacher's words healed some hearts, shadows still lingered. The director's pride had been wounded deeper, and in his silence now, there was something more dangerous than words. Resentment, sharp and hidden, waited for its chance to strike again. And as the night moved forward, as music returned, and conversations slowly rebuilt themselves, both Keanu and Sandra knew one thing. This was no longer just a party. It was a test, one that would demand more strength, more patience, and more courage than they had expected. The third chapter closed with a question heavy in the minds of everyone who watched. Would love and humility continue to hold against jealousy and pride, or was a greater storm about to break open before the night was done? The music returned after the teacher's heartfelt words, but the atmosphere of the hall was forever changed. What had once been an evening of glittering lights and polite laughter had now become a stage for truth, kindness, envy, and pride. Every glance carried meaning. Every silence felt like the pause before thunder. Sandra sat close to Keanu, her hand lightly resting on his, her heart beating faster than she wished to admit. She felt the eyes of the crowd on them still, measuring every gesture, every smile, every silence. She leaned closer and whispered, "This night feels like more than a party. It feels like we're standing in the middle of something bigger." Keanu gave her a quiet nod, his calm steadying her again. "Sometimes the world tests us when we least expect it," he murmured. "But the test is not to see if we win. The test is to see if we remain ourselves." His words gave Sandra strength, but the storm around them had not passed. At the far end of the hall, the director who had spoken so bitterly earlier sat brooding, his pride boiling into anger. He had watched the old actor find his voice, watched the young musician succeed, watched the teacher defend them. Each moment had pushed him deeper into the shadows of his own envy. To him, kindness was not strength, it was weakness disguised as virtue, and he was determined to prove it. The opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. As the hall shifted toward dinner with guests finding their places, the director stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound drew all attention. With a forced smile, he raised his glass again. "Forgive me," he said, his voice dripping with charm that barely hid his bitterness. "Perhaps earlier I was misunderstood. Perhaps I spoke too harshly. So let me offer another toast. This time, a toast to truth." His eyes locked on Keanu and Sandra, and the crowd tensed. Everyone could sense that his words carried more than politeness. "Truth," he continued, his voice growing louder, "is what we hide behind masks. Actors, after all, are masters of masks. But I wonder, when the cameras are gone, when the lights fade, what do these masks truly hide? Do we see kindness, or do we see ambition? Do we see humility, or do we see pride dressed in softer clothes?" A wave of discomfort spread across the room. Some guests shifted uneasily in their chairs. Others leaned forward, hungry for conflict. The director's words pierced the fragile balance of the night, threatening to shatter it completely. Sandra's hand trembled in Keanu's, her anger rising. She wanted to defend them, to silence the poison with her own voice. But Keanu remained still, his calmness like a shield. Finally, he stood, his presence commanding the room without force. "Truth is not always what people say about us," Keanu began, his voice low yet powerful, each word carrying weight. "Truth is what remains when no one is watching. It is how we treat a stranger, how we lift someone when no one is there to clap, how we choose kindness when cruelty seems easier. If that is a mask, then let the world call it so. But for us, it is not a mask. It is who we are." The room was silent, every ear hanging on his words. Sandra stood beside him now, her voice joining his, steady and clear. "We are not perfect. We have stumbled, we have failed. But our worth is not measured by perfection. It is measured by how we rise after falling and how we treat others when they stumble too." For a moment, their words seemed to heal the tension. Applause began softly, like raindrops before a storm. But then the director struck again. He slammed his glass down on the table, the sound sharp and angry. "Beautiful speeches," he spat, "but words are easy. Anyone can play the saint with words. What about actions? Do you dare to prove them here in front of everyone?" The challenge echoed in the hall. It was no longer whispers. It was a public confrontation. The crowd leaned in, waiting, some eager to see Keanu and Sandra falter, others desperate to see them hold strong. Before Keanu could reply, a waiter entered the hall, struggling with a tray too heavy for his young arms. In the silence, the tray slipped, glasses and plates crashing to the floor. The sound rang out like thunder. The boy froze, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. Broken glass sparkled on the floor like shards of shame. The director's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Here is your chance," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Let us see if your kindness is real, or just another performance." The hall held its breath. Keanu did not hesitate. He walked calmly toward the boy, his steps unhurried, his face soft. He knelt beside him, picking up the larger pieces of glass with his bare hands. Sandra joined him, smiling at the boy as if nothing had gone wrong. "Everyone drops something sometimes," she whispered to the trembling waiter. "It is how we learn to carry better next time." The boy's eyes filled with tears, not of shame now, but of relief. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your mistake does not define you. How you rise after it will." Together, they helped him gather the broken pieces, while the crowd watched in silence. And then, something unexpected happened. One by one, guests began to rise. Some walked forward to help clean, others offered kind words to the boy. The hall that had been filled with whispers of envy now filled with acts of support, sparked by the simple choice of two people to show compassion. The director's smile faltered. His plan had backfired. Instead of proving their kindness as false, he had given them the chance to reveal it more clearly than ever. The storm he had tried to unleash had only shown the strength of their calm. But deep inside, his resentment only grew darker. He had lost the crowd for now, but he was not finished. Not yet. And so, the fourth chapter closed with the hall united for a moment, inspired by a simple act of kindness, but with a shadow still waiting, a shadow that would return stronger, determined to break what love and humility had built. The hall had grown quiet again after the broken glass was cleared away, but it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried weight, the kind of silence that comes when people have witnessed something true and cannot ignore it anymore. Many hearts had softened, many minds had been opened. But in the shadows, the director's resentment only deepened. He sat at his table, his fingers tapping against the wood, his eyes fixed on Keanu and Sandra. Every time the crowd clapped for them, every time someone looked at them with admiration, he felt his pride tear apart. He was a man who had built his career on control, on power, on making others bow to his opinion. Tonight, Keanu and Sandra had undone him with nothing more than calm words and quiet kindness. To him, that was unbearable. As the evening moved toward its later hours, the host announced a charity auction to raise funds for struggling artists. The hall brightened again, laughter and chatter slowly returning. Valuable paintings, rare memorabilia, and personal treasures were placed up for bid. The energy seemed lighter, almost hopeful. But beneath the glow of the auction, the director hatched his scheme. He leaned toward a group of influential guests, whispering words that dripped with poison. "They think humility makes them pure," he said. "But wait until you see what happens when their own reputation is on the line. Let's see if kindness survives when pride is tested." His plan was cruel, designed not to challenge their words, but to expose them, to create a moment where he believed their calm would shatter. The item came in the middle of the auction, a framed photograph, rare and deeply meaningful. It showed a behind-the-scenes moment from years ago during the filming of a movie where Keanu and Sandra had first shared the screen. In the picture, they were not acting. They were simply laughing together, unaware of the camera. It was raw, real, and filled with a joy that made hearts ache. The auctioneer presented it with pride. "This photograph is not only rare," he said, "but it captures a moment that many fans believe marked the beginning of something truly special. We will start the bidding at a modest price." Immediately, hands went up, numbers called out, prices climbing higher and higher. The audience was captivated, but for Keanu and Sandra, the moment was heavier than anyone could guess. It was not just a picture. It was a memory, a reminder of days when their bond had been pure, untouched by rumors, untouched by doubt. The Bidding reached a fever pitch, and then, just as the final call was about to close, the director raised his hand. His voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. "I bid twice the current price." Gasps filled the hall. The auctioneer froze, stunned by the sudden leap. All eyes turned to the director as he stood, holding the room in his grip. "And when I win," he said loudly, "I will not hang this picture in honor. No, I will burn it, right here, in front of everyone, because sometimes the past is nothing but a story told to fool the present." The hall erupted in shock. Voices clashed, anger rose, disbelief spread. Sandra's eyes filled with horror, her hand flying to her mouth. Keanu's calm face tightened, his chest rising slowly as he struggled to contain the storm inside him. The director's challenge was clear. This was no longer about an auction. It was about humiliation. He wanted to destroy the symbol of their bond, to prove that their story was fragile, that their kindness could not protect what they loved. The host tried to intervene, but the director pushed forward. "Unless," he said, his grin sharp, "unless they prove themselves here and now, they talk about humility, about lifting others. But will they stand when something they love is threatened? Will they still be calm? Or will they finally show us the pride they hide behind soft words?" The hall leaned forward, holding its breath. The moment was sharp as glass, and every heart waited for Keanu and Sandra's reaction. Sandra's hands trembled. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "He cannot do this. He cannot destroy something that holds so much meaning." Tears touched her lashes, not of weakness, but of deep pain. Keanu placed his hand over hers, grounding her. He rose slowly, his tall figure steady, his face unreadable. The crowd hushed instantly, waiting. His eyes locked on the director's, but there was no hatred in them, only sadness. "If you burn the picture," Keanu said softly, "you will not burn our truth, because truth does not live in frames or paper. It lives in hearts, in the way we choose to stand together, in the moments no camera ever caught. You cannot take that away. Not from us, not from anyone." His words washed over the crowd, but the director laughed, cruel and mocking. "Words again, always words. Let's see action." He gestured to the auctioneer. "Close the bidding. The photograph is mine." Before the auctioneer could act, something unexpected happened. A young woman rose from her seat near the back of the hall. Her voice was trembling but determined. "I will bid higher," she said. The hall turned to look at her, surprised. "I don't have money like him," she continued, "but I will give everything I have, because that photograph means more than a picture. It means hope. It means that kindness survives in this world. I grew up watching them, and I survived hard days because I believed in what they stood for. That photo is not just theirs. It belongs to everyone who ever needed that hope." Tears rippled across the room. The director's grin faltered. The auctioneer hesitated, unsure what to do. The crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, a wave of support rising for the young woman. Keanu and Sandra both turned toward her, their eyes filled with gratitude. Sandra's tears fell freely now, but they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of strength, of knowing that their bond had touched lives far beyond themselves. The director stood frozen, the crowd's energy turning against him. His plan to humiliate them had backfired once again. Instead of breaking their dignity, he had revealed the depth of it. Instead of destroying their truth, he had given others the chance to rise in its defense. But though he lowered his hand slowly, though his face twisted with suppressed fury, one truth remained. He was not finished. His pride would not let him walk away quietly. The night still had one final storm waiting, and so the 5th chapter closed with a hall united in support, with love and humility shining brighter than envy, but with a darker question lingering. How far would resentment go when pride had already lost twice? The hall glowed with applause for the young woman who had stood up, her voice trembling yet filled with courage. For the first time that night, the crowd felt united. People smiled at one another, strangers nodded in silent respect, and the heaviness that had hung over the evening seemed to lift. Sandra held Keanu's hand tightly, her eyes still wet with tears, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not pain. She whispered, "We are not alone, Keanu. People believe in us more than we ever knew." He gave a small nod, his calm eyes soft with pride for her, for the crowd, for the truth that had risen out of so much bitterness. But in the corner of the hall, the director sat like a shadow refusing to fade. His pride had been cut down again, and again, and now it burned with a dangerous fury. He could not accept defeat. He could not accept that kindness had outshined him. He stood suddenly, the scrape of his chair sharp and jarring, and the entire hall froze once more. His voice rang out, louder than ever, filled with venom. "You call this truth? You call this strength? It is nothing but weakness dressed in sweet words. You think the world can survive on kindness? No. The world belongs to those who take, who control, who dominate. You," he pointed at Keanu and Sandra, "are frauds. Tonight I will prove it." A hush swept through the hall. Some gasped, some shook their heads, others leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The director reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. He slammed it down on the nearest table. "Inside here are stories," he declared. "Rumors, truths, call them what you will. Dark pieces of their lives that the world has never seen. Tonight I will expose them. Let us see if anyone believes their kindness then." The hall went silent. Sandra's breath caught in her chest, fear rushing through her veins. Keanu placed a steady hand on her arm, his calm holding her like an anchor. The director opened the folder with a dramatic flourish, but as the papers spilled out, a strange thing happened. They were not filled with scandal or secrets. Instead, they were nothing but empty sheets. Blank pages fluttered across the table and onto the floor. The crowd gasped, confused, then murmured in disbelief. The director froze, his face draining of color. He looked down, flipping through page after page, realizing too late that someone had switched the contents. His plan had failed before it even began. Whispers rose in the hall, not against Keanu and Sandra, but against him. And then, from the back of the room, the old teacher who had defended them earlier spoke again. Her voice was steady, firm, filled with the wisdom of age. "You see," she said, "there are no shadows to reveal because their truth is not built on hiding. It is built on living with respect, humility, and resilience. You cannot destroy what is real, no matter how hard you try." Applause thundered through the hall. People rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, their voices joining together in a wave of support. Sandra wept openly now, unable to hold back the emotion, and Keanu wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. The director stumbled back, his power gone, his pride crushed not by arguments or by force, but by the undeniable truth that kindness had triumphed over bitterness. He turned, trying to leave quietly, but the crowd's energy left him no space. He slipped away into the shadows, a defeated figure fading into silence. Keanu and Sandra remained standing, surrounded by applause. But instead of basking in it, Keanu lifted his hand to quiet the room. His voice was soft, yet every ear bent. Toward him. "Tonight was not about us," he said. "Tonight was about choice. Every day, each of us faces the choice to answer cruelty with cruelty, or to answer it with kindness. Humility is not weakness. It is strength that does not need to shout. Respect is not about status. It is about seeing the value in every soul. And resilience is not about never falling. It is about rising again, together after every fall," Sandra added, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "We all carry storms inside us, but we also carry the light to calm them. The question is which one we share with the world. The hall erupted again, this time with applause that did not fade. People stood, some with tears, some with smiles, many holding hands with the person beside them. The night had transformed from a party into something deeper, something unforgettable. Later, as Keanu and Sandra stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights glowing softly around them, Sandra leaned against him and whispered, "We came to this party together, but we are leaving with something more, not just as a couple, but as a reminder that kindness still matters." Keanu smiled, his calm eyes gazing into the distance. And no storm can take that away. The night closed, not with glitter, not with scandal, but with truth. An ending that would stay with everyone who had witnessed it, reminding them that love, humility, and respect will always shine brighter than envy, pride, and bitterness.